We've still got some attendees coming into the meeting, so we'll give it just a minute or two and then we'll get started.
Okay, so we are live on YouTube.
We've still got some attendees coming into the meeting, so we'll give it just a minute or two and then we'll get started.
That's going to be the YouTube lag. Karin, if you were
We're live on YouTube.
We've still got some attendees coming into the meeting, so we'll give it just a minute or two and then we'll get started.
That's going to be the YouTube lag.
Yeah.
Karin, if you were
live on YouTube. There you go. Thanks, Karin. So how do we get rid of the lag?
It's going to be the YouTube lag. Karin, if you were
I don't know, because that's never happened before.
Megan, are you there? How do we get rid of the lag? It might first help, Karin, if you mute. You'll still have to hear it, unfortunately, but you don't have to just the mute. That way we don't.
Okay, well, that seems to have taken care of the problem. So let's get started. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's meeting of the City Council Sustainability Climate Action Plan Ad Hoc Committee. I'm Brad Eggleston, Director of Public Works for Palo Alto. And this is the committee's second public meeting where we'll be discussing the very important issue of converting from natural gas to electric appliances in residential buildings. And just a reminder, this committee is not structured as a Brown Act. So the meeting doesn't start with a formal oral communications, but we do hope to have more of a workshop feel to the meetings than a typical council or committee meeting. We are recording this meeting. It'll be posted to the city's website. We'll also send out a link following the meeting to view it. And we're also streaming the meeting live on YouTube today. You'll be able to ask questions or make comments in the Zoom Q&A function, and we'll try to answer these questions during the meetings, but we'll also keep track of any of them that we don't answer and find a way to respond to them later. And I will point out that although we don't have an oral communications at the beginning of the meeting, we are having a planning for the public to be able to make comment after the staff presentation. So this is our agenda for the meeting. We'll start with a quick review of last month's initial committee meeting. We'll then have a high-level overview of some of the key work products for the SCAP. As you see here, the impact analysis report, the draft goals and key actions, and the draft 3-year work plan that's been developed. Then we'll get into the topic of residential building electrification in more detail, where we'll also drill into the corresponding 3-year work plan items for residential electrification. So in the work plan, high level on the entire work plan for the SCAP, but we will go into some more detail specifically on the electrification. And we'll have several members of the staff team making the presentation, but I'd now like to turn it over to our sustainability manager, Christine Wong.
Thanks, Brad. Good morning, everybody. So thanks for everyone who is attending today and was able to attend our August meeting. Last time, just as a quick recap for anyone who wasn't able to make it, we had 86 attendees. We had great turnout, and we were joined by 9 high school students as well, which was really wonderful. And we heard from 40 participants on a range of topics. The things that we heard the most were that we cannot delay taking action on climate change, and that we needed to devote resources and develop a financing plan for implementation, and to work on SCAP implementation in parallel to SCAP update completion. And as a reminder, the PowerPoint presentation, the recording, and the summary of all the public comments from the August meeting are posted on our sustainability website. So also at the August meeting, we put out a call for SCAP domain advisors in the following areas. Thank you to everyone who has already volunteered. We currently have 18 volunteers and we'll be in touch with next steps. If you are interested in volunteering or learning more, you can email us at sustainability@cityofpaloalto.org. So as I mentioned briefly before, at the last ad hoc meeting, we heard from many people that we cannot delay action on climate change. So we just wanted to be very clear that we do not have to wait until the SCAP until the SCAP is adopted and CEQA review is complete before we can start working on the SCAP goals. So there are 5 broad areas of effort that we know we need to focus on right away. So building consensus among advocates and policymakers, engaging stakeholders for SCAP input, partnering with the community to raise awareness and promote services, to build compelling services and tools and recruit users, and create an electrification roadmap. And these are the work areas that we are prioritizing over the next 3 years. And I'm not going to talk through this entire slide, but it gives you an idea of what sorts of activities we think are involved in each of these work areas. And we'll be posting these slides on the website if you want to review this more closely. And as you can see from our timeline, we see the need to start working on all work areas in parallel. So we have our ad hoc committee discussions and stakeholder engagement at the same time that we're building community awareness, working on new program features, and doing additional SCAP studies on long-term policy development. So before jumping into other topics, we wanted to note the recent release of the AECOM impact analysis memo. AECOM is the consultant that we've been working with on the SCAP update. And the key takeaways from the memo are that SCAP, the proposed SCAP actions can reduce emissions 71% below 1990 levels by 2030. The most cost-effective strategy is reducing vehicle emissions through electric vehicles and alternative travel. And the most cost-effective strategies within building electrification are electrifying single-family residential water heating and space heating, and electrifying commercial rooftop HVAC units. Another highlight from the AECOM impact analysis memo is the impacts of the co-benefits, which included all of the sustainability areas. The vast majority of the proposed SCAP key actions have somewhat positive or very positive co-benefits, with only 3 proposed SCAP actions having negative impacts on cost of living and 1 key action having a negative impact on equity. AECOM also provided recommendations on how to achieve the remaining 9% of greenhouse gas emissions reductions needed to meet our 80 by 30 goal. And those include finding ways to accelerate or enhance already identified key actions or identifying additional key actions, and removing challenges or barriers to key action implementation. So now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Jonathan Abenshine.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Abenshine. I'm the Assistant Director for Utilities and Resource Management. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the things we've done in response to the impact analysis. So based on the impact analysis, the results of the impact analysis, going into this whole effort, we had a set of goals and key actions that we thought would move us far in the direction of the 80 by 30 goals. But based on the impact analysis, we were able to refine those goals and key actions to really better reflect the outcomes that are needed to achieve 80 by 30, and also to integrate some additional items that were included in the council motion back in April. If you remember, the SCAP goals and key actions reflect the planned actions for all 7 of the SCAP areas, and only 4 of those address climate impact, climate action and adaptation. The actions for water, natural environment, and zero waste were also reviewed and updated when we updated these goals and key actions, but there were only minor changes to the city's direction in those areas. But with the information from the impact analysis, we were able to ensure that the energy, mobility, and EV sections now fully reflect the ambitious level of effort that's needed to achieve the 80 by 30 goals. And we added a new SCAP area, which we are referring to as climate action. And that reflects goals that cover all of the different climate action areas. It includes things like studies of carbon neutrality and also identifying those additional emissions reductions measures that we need to implement to help the community get from the 71% emissions reductions identified in the impact analysis to the 80% reduction needed to meet our goals. These goals and key actions were shared on the website and with the invitation, so you should be able to review those and provide feedback. Can we get the next slide, please? So, in addition to the goals and key actions are fairly high level. And so we created a work plan to help us manage progress towards achieving those goals and key actions. And while the goals and key actions provide a high level set of policies for moving forward on the SCAP, the work plan has a detailed view of what needs to be done in 2021 through 2024. It has some rough indications of the level of staff effort and funding needed. It gives you an idea of the climate impact of each action and then each action's current status. You're going to see that the numbering in the work plan corresponds to the numbering in the goals and key actions. There are 4 sections to the work plan. The first represents the SCAP adoption process, and then that includes our engagement and outreach efforts. The second section discusses new programs and services we're developing through 2021 and through 2024. And the third section represents studies to help us figure out the roadmap for post-2024 when we really need to scale up. And I just remind everyone, we're talking that the scale we're talking about is 1,000 to 2,000 home conversions every year. That's at a very, very high rate that takes some planning to really properly accommodate, for funding, staffing, and business processes. And then the last section talks about natural environment and climate adaptation efforts through 2021 through 2024. You're going to see a lot of effort and climate impact that's represented in this work plan if we're able to execute everything in there. You will see from the status updates in the work plan that we have already gotten started on a lot of the work items in there. I do want to be clear that the work plan isn't something that can be achieved with the current levels of funding and staffing. We can do a lot, but we can't do everything. We've been working internally. We're working on a detailed assessment of what resources are needed to complete everything in the work plan. There are also some funding sources that are available to us we can use. And we plan to have some preliminary information for discussion with the ad hoc subcommittee next month, while those internal discussions are also continuing with the city manager and the executive and budget team. And like the goals and key actions, this work plan was shared with the meeting material, with the materials for this ad hoc subcommittee meeting. So you can find those on the website as well. Next slide, please. All right, so we just want to introduce you to the goals and key actions in the work plan, but it is a very, very broad work plan. It covers all of the areas of emissions reduction and sustainability efforts. It spans transportation and buildings, it spans residential and non-residential sectors. But for today's discussion, we're going to just focus on one of the really critical areas that was identified in the impact analysis, which is residential building electrification. Next slide, please. All right, so this shows the city's emissions for 2019 based on the emissions inventory we did for the impact analysis. And you can see here that residential buildings make up one of the larger sources of emissions in the city. They make up 15% of current emissions now that we have carbon neutral electricity. And if you take the higher upstream emissions of natural gas into account, they make up as much as 20%. You can see that methane has a higher, when you think about leakage from the system, the extract gas, methane extraction, methane transmission, all the way to the appliance itself, that methane has a much higher global warming potential than the carbon dioxide that comes from burning the methane. And when you look at the upstream emissions from methane, it definitely increases the impact that building electrification can have on our emissions reductions. So that's what's reflected in that pie chart on the right. Moving on to the next slide. when we just coming back to the impact analysis, when we look at the costs that were estimated in the impact analysis, single family residential electrification is one of the least costly alternatives for emissions reduction after vehicles. Christine noted that vehicles were the most efficient. In fact, they represent a net savings, but right after that, single family emissions reductions are one of the most cost effective measures. Those emissions reductions measures can compare favorably to the cost of actually buying renewable electricity. And especially if you're replacing appliances at end of life or replacing AC units with heat pumps. So it really represents a natural place for the community to focus right now. Single family residences make up close to 2/3 of residential emissions. The pie chart that I just showed represented both single family and multifamily. Multifamily buildings are still a significant source of emissions, but in the impact analysis, we found that it'd be more costly to electrify because the technologies that you need for things like central heating and water heating systems, they're not as easily available or cost effective in a heat pump configuration, and the constrained layout of multifamily buildings just makes it more difficult to electrify them. So we found those to be some of the most, multifamily electrification to be some of the most expensive measures we analyzed, but I don't think we're under the illusion that we've investigated every possibility for electrifying multifamily buildings. So that's something that we can look at in the studies we do over the next 18 to 24 months. So now I'm going to turn it over to Scott Melberg.
Thank you, Jonathan. I'm Scott Melberg. I'm with the Utilities Department. I'm a program manager of residential efficiency and electrification programs. So heat pump technologies can be used to improve efficiency, safety, and performance by replacing their gas-fueled counterparts. The core of heat pump technology is actually quite simple. It is commonly used throughout your home. It's actually the same technology that's in your kitchen refrigerator, but it can work in reverse. So essentially, heat pumps move heat from one place to another. This process is actually extremely efficient, typically yielding about 300% efficiency. So for every unit of energy used, the heat pump will actually move 3 units of heat energy. Heat pumps are also a very mature technology, and they have been in use in all parts of the world for actually many decades. Shown here are heat pumps for water heating, space heating and cooling, clothes drying, and plus there's also an image of an electric induction cooktop. The image on the upper left is a heat pump water heater, which closely resembles a gas tank, but it uses heat pump to move the heat from the air around it to actually heat the water. Also shown are 3 examples of heat pumps for space heating and cooling in different sort of configurations. Heat pump space heating and cooling can be very similar in application to your typical forced air furnace, those with an air conditioner, but this actually can run without a gas furnace. An example of that is shown in black in the system that both heats and cools, and it has a single outdoor unit. Below that are a couple of examples of ductless heat pump systems that work well in both single family and also in multifamily applications. Induction stove cooking has many advantages over gas. It's faster than gas. It is more responsive. It's safer from a burn perspective. It's healthier in terms of emissions inside your home. And actually all major appliance manufacturers make them. And you can see actually from this image, they're quite sleek and they're easy to clean. And many professional cooks and restaurants are actually swearing by them now. Next slide. So there are many benefits associated with converting your gas appliances to electric ones. First and foremost, reducing your greenhouse gas emissions by using the City of Palo Alto's carbon neutral electricity and then not emitting gas from your home's appliances. Electric homes are safer by not needing a flammable gas fuel, which reduces the possibility of carbon monoxide poisoning. Induction stoves are less likely to get burned on, and there's no open flame, and burners actually cool more quickly. It improves your home's indoor air quality, especially with cooking with gas and also with gas appliances like water heaters and furnaces, which can actually backdraft or leak dangerous gases into your home. All gas burning appliances do emit combustion gases to the outside air, which contain toxic pollutants, and electric appliances do not have any combustion gases. And as mentioned before, heat pumps are very efficient technology and far exceed the efficiency of any gas appliances. Next slide. There are many challenges to electrification, and I'll run through a few of them here. A lack of awareness of what electrification is and why is it important is one of our first challenges to increase the adoption. These electric technologies, though common in other parts of even this country and the world, are somewhat unfamiliar to many here. There are misconceptions about how they work and that they are somehow inferior, like induction cooking. There are some who feel that the city should be making other priorities. Another concern is swapping out like for like equipment is oftentimes more convenient. And so electrification measures can oftentimes take more effort. People have a more emotional attachment sometimes to gas, which is often the case with gas stoves and fireplaces. There are often higher upfront costs due to fuel switching because electric circuits will need to be run to the location of where the gas piping was before. And oftentimes the electrical panel may need to be evaluated for the additional circuits and possibly even upgraded. With the very low price of gas, even with the very efficient utilization of electric with heat pumps, a cost to run certain electric appliances can actually may not be lower than gas. And although there are many qualified contractors who are comfortable with the heat pump technologies, there are many more who are not, and they continue to be detractors from these technologies. We also have some potential lacks of equity in how electrification will be implemented between homeowners and renters, and especially this is true in multifamily properties. The next slide. So for currently available services, we do have the Home Efficiency Genie. That is our first line of electrification information and guidance for our residents. They offer free efficiency and electrification advice with their over the phone service. In 2020, we pivoted from an in-home assessment version to a virtual home assessment, and we actually will resume some in-home assessment options, planning probably later in September. Also associated with the assessment is, which we launched in 2019, was the home electrification readiness assessment that is done both in a in-person or a virtual version. That offers a review of your electrical panel and what options are available for changing for any heat pump system, whether it's water heating, space heating, induction cooking, or even adding an EV. The Genie has provided a list of vetted home performance contractors. It's about a dozen of them on the list now who do electrification upgrades like heat pump heating and ventilation systems, heat pump water heaters, and very important building envelope upgrades. Genie also provides a list of local electricians who can help specifically with electric panel upgrades. The Genie has had a very high satisfaction rate in its 6 years. The net promoter scores are consistently over 95, and really residents have said that they really love this program. However, the program needs to be enhanced. We need to reach more residents and to drive more electrification upgrades. In addition to the Genie program, we have the heat pump water heater rebate program. Those rebates are $1,200 to $1,500 depending on the size of the unit. In that program as well, we have a list of heat pump water heater contractors who actually do both of the trades, because these projects oftentimes involve plumbing and electrical. Currently, we have 7 contractors who people can contact that do both those trades. These projects also had advice from the Genie throughout the project, and we have rebated about 70 heat pump water heater projects to date, and we have done some comparison to other programs across the region, and that's actually on par with some of the participation rates of other programs. But we obviously know we want to increase that dramatically. And I want to talk also that we implemented an all-electric reach code, and that's actually similar to many other Bay Area communities. It applies to new construction. It was adopted in 2019 and implemented in April of 2020. And so now all new homes are designed so that they run on all electric equipment. And that's the end of my section. Lisa Bennett is next.
Great. Thank you, Scott. Hi, I'm Lisa Benatar, manager of the Utilities Program Services Group, the group that Scott is in. We manage programs for electricity, gas, and water, as well as fiber for both commercial and residential customers. So we've got a lot on our plates. As Scott mentioned, we currently have programs that help address some of the challenges for home electrification, but we have a pretty big challenge ahead of us, which is to electrify all of the single-family homes in Palo Alto by 2030. Last week, there was an event, I think it was on Wednesday evening, that Councilmember Cormack attended on climate action. And at the event, she shared a graphic that shows the typical adoption rate curve for innovation. And that's shown here. I don't know what the adoption rate for home electrification is going to look like in Palo Alto, but I do know that right now we are very far on the left of this curve at the very early stages where just a handful of really innovative people have gone all electric. I also know that it's going to take a lot more than programs to bring about the kind of drastic adoption that will be needed to meet our climate goals. But what we can do with programs in this near term, which we're calling like the next 1 to 3 years, is to make it as easy as possible for this next group, labeled early adopters on this curve, to electrify so that they can serve as positive points of reference and help us build momentum and demonstrate some of the benefits of electrification. So that's the first guidepost for our program planning. A second point is that we should be thinking about preparing to scale with the programs that we're designing and planning to roll out in the next few years. We're going to want to put systems in place to help us handle increasing volumes of customers who are switching to electricity. And a third point that we're going to use to sort of guide our planning processes is the objective of building awareness. This is important for several reasons, one of which is we want to cultivate more of those early adopters. We also want to educate this next group, the early majority. But perhaps most importantly, we really want to get the word out to the community as a whole that this is the direction things are heading in. So these are some of the things that we're going to want to consider as we design our programs. We also want to acknowledge that even early adopters, as enthusiastic as they are, may not want to replace their existing gas equipment before the end of its useful life. Next slide. Hopefully people won't wait this long. This is a photo of a leaking water heater. Hopefully people haven't experienced this themselves. This probably wouldn't happen to an electrification enthusiast, but for the general public, by far the majority of the time, I've heard numbers as high as 87%, gas equipment like furnaces and water heaters is replaced in an emergency situation when it breaks. And in situations like that, people don't usually want to wait more than a day or two to replace the equipment. So how can we help make sure that when it's time to replace gas equipment, it gets replaced with electric equipment? There are several factors, but I've listed two here. One is a main factor is that customers need to be informed and prepared about switching from gas to electric. And secondly, contractors need to be available who are informed and prepared to replace gas equipment with electric equipment. I want to talk about how we hope to address these two factors and some of the other challenges that Scott mentioned with the programs that we're planning. Next slide. So even early adopters and people who are enthusiastic about electrification may not know where to start in order to get informed. So our existing Genie phone advisory service, as Scott mentioned, is free. Customers can call in with questions and receive guidance. They can also take advantage of our home assessments, either in home, and those will be restarting later this month. They had been paused due to COVID, or through a virtual platform. Both these in-home and virtual assessments include our home electrification readiness assessment, which can help people, amongst other things, figure out how old their existing equipment is, which is really important. So these are a couple of services that we have already. I do want to mention that through the home assessments, we are gathering information on the location and age of existing gas equipment, which is really important if we want to be able to reach out specifically to those customers whose equipment is aging. And we're looking at ways to expand those efforts. So that's also going to be key. So people can call in, they can have an assessment to get information. We're also looking at ways to expand our online tools to include a home electrification calculator tool so that customers can evaluate the economics of going electric and they can build out a roadmap for the process. So that's something we're looking at. And once customers have a project in mind, we're hoping to offer a program called Be Ready, where the BE stands for Building Electrification. This program would provide customers with pre-qualified contractors to do any of the electric panel upgrades or wiring upgrade work that might be needed at the location where the new equipment will be installed. And then once it's time to install the new equipment, we're planning to offer turnkey services, installation services for both electrification and building envelope improvements. So those turnkey services would be new. And I should mention that all of these services would be offered to both income qualified and non-income qualified customers with additional handholding and incentives for the income qualified customers. And in many cases, the retrofits would be available for our income qualified customers at no cost. So it'd be great if we can provide customers with turnkey services and qualified contractors. I should mention that some customers may want to use their own contractors or choose a contractor from a list of qualified contractors that we provide. Again, as Scott mentioned, these are things that we already do now. We provide a list of qualified contractors. Customers can receive now, and we're planning to continue this and beef it up, technical assistance with things like evaluating contractor bids and selecting contractors. So in terms of incentives, rebates, we're working on expanding our incentives for electrification equipment. Right now, we just have heat pump water heaters. We're planning to expand that. And while currently we review all of the incoming rebate applications internally, we're evaluating proposals from third-party vendors to provide rebate program administration services. So that would enable us to scale to handle higher volumes, which is really important, as I mentioned, second guidepost. So we're also looking at on-bill financing as a way of helping customers manage the high upfront cost of electrification. That's a complicated endeavor, but we're definitely putting some efforts into that as well. So all of these services that we're describing here aim to make it easier for people to electrify their homes, as I mentioned. That was our first point of guidance for customer planning. Many of these services that I've marked here with an asterisk, and some of the ones actually that I haven't, but especially those do help us prepare to scale, which I referred to earlier as being important. And all of these things will help us manage growing numbers of customers who are interested in going electric. So this last item I want to point out, home gas reports, is a program we're pursuing with the idea of building awareness on a larger scale, reaching out to all single family homeowners or residents with reports that give them information about their gas use. So it's kind of like the home energy reports that people may recall receiving several years back, but these reports would focus on gas use only to kind of, again, really bring awareness to that form of energy that people are using that they're not always aware of. Sometimes if you ask people, where do you use gas in your home? They say the stove, and they don't realize that space heating is a huge gas user, or water heating. So these reports would raise awareness amongst customers, and also it would educate customers about the carbon impacts of their gas use. And the reports would provide links to our electrification programs and services. So that was a lot in one slide. This list of services hopefully addresses at least some of the interest areas that we've heard from community groups. I want to say, rest assured, we hear you, and we really appreciate your dedication and input. And then if we think back, Jonathan mentioned earlier, you can find these programs listed and the broader areas of SCAP topics that staff is working on referenced in the documents that were provided for this meeting. Next slide. There we go. These documents are shown here. There's some links. They include a white paper on residential building electrification, the draft goals and key actions document, and the 3-year work plan document, which includes information on the status of the key actions. Also, Jonathan mentioned that a little bit about how the key actions are organized. They're organized by categories. For example, the programs I just described are pretty much all in the category of energy, E for energy in the key actions. These mostly fall under E1, which is launching comprehensive residential services. That sounds easy, but as you could see, it involves a lot. So again, you can have a look at these documents and get an idea of the broader efforts. Next slide. Okay, these next 2 slides have a lot of information, but the idea is to illustrate that, as I said earlier, it's going to take a lot more than programs for us to reach our 80 by 30 goal. This slide shows the programs I laid out a couple of slides ago, listed in the bottom left quadrant. It also lays out activities related to policies and funding and labels them so that you can, again, reference them in the documents provided. These items in the lower right quadrant are going to be critical. They're about policies and funding mechanisms related to reaching the community's climate goals. So you can see more information on those efforts in the documents provided. Next slide. Okay, we've talked mostly about single-family homes. This slide summarizes work related to multifamily homes. Again, the need for new policies is going to be really important. This slide lists some of the policies and activities that are underway for the multifamily sector. And again, these can be found in those same documents available on the sustainability website. So that about brings us to the end of the presentation. We'll go back to Christine now.
Thank you, Lisa. Christine Luong, Sustainability Manager with the City of Palo Alto. So today we focused a lot on residential building electrification, and next month we're going to continue the discussion on buildings and shift focus a little to permitting, permitting for building electrification and switching focus to commercial building electrification. We'll also talk briefly about near-term funding and resource options. So we hope you can join for our October ad hoc meeting as well. If you have any questions, please put your questions in the Q&A box and not the chat box so that we can answer your questions. And if you have any other questions or comments that you want to submit, you can also email us at sustainability@cityofpaloalto.org. And as Councilmember Cormack and Vice Mayor Burt discussed previously, we have some questions for the audience. In the residential building electrification overview, we've outlined barriers to residential building electrification. What are your top 3 barriers? Does our draft 3-year work plan address those barriers? And what should the city's top 3 priorities be for advancing residential building electrification? We've already received a few responses in advance of the meeting to our sustainability mailbox, but you can also email us at sustainability@cityofpaloalto.org. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Christine. Yes, so those are some questions we'd like you to focus on. If you could, when we get to the public comment section, of course, other comments are welcome as well. Before we start that, I'd like to give our ad hoc members a chance to weigh in or make any comments they would like to make. Vice Mayor or Councilmember Cormack?
Well, I can start off. Thanks for the presentation, and we clearly have both a lot that is already in the works, and then a lot of things that we're going to need to do to really achieve the scaling that is our ambition and our goal. And I know that next meeting is going to dive more into the permitting part, but I'd be interested in hearing more, kind of in some ways introducing what we're going to discuss the next meeting on how we really will get to the scaling that's necessary to achieve our goals, and whether we think that we're going to need to have significantly different approaches to how we permit and streamline the adoption systems. So I don't know if staff has any initial thoughts on that. I appreciating that we'll be diving into that more deeply next month.
Jonathan, would you have any initial thoughts on that we'd be ready to share today in advance of October's meeting?
I'm not sure that I'm ready to that I have something ready to share on permitting right off the top of my head at this meeting. No.
Okay. And one other technical question. One of the kind of physical barriers is with heat pumps needing often a larger circuit, but I've seen that there are technologies coming online with 15 amp requirements. And has staff been looking at that and how feasible that is for what meeting the demands of a typical home on hot water heating? And whether are we looking at combining that with point of use heaters that are often put in line that also have water conservation benefits?
I think we're looking at a wide range of technologies and trying to take into consideration everything that's available. I think we share the specific technologies that you're looking at. We could take a look at that, and we could tell you how we're incorporating those and get back to you.
Okay. All right, thanks.
Good morning. Thanks to everyone for attending. Thanks to staff for so much information. And I think I'm starting to follow the organization structure. Fortunately, we've been given a binder and I'm flipping back and forth. So I think while we've shared all this information, it's still hard for people to organize. So we might want to spend a little bit of time collectively over the next week, sort of mapping the things out, because I'm starting to understand how it makes sense, but it's a little bit hard to follow on the website. I just want to take a moment to thank everyone who shared additional information between the last meeting and this meeting. We were talking with staff briefly earlier today, and much of it I think staff described as evolutionary in the thinking. And that's really what I think this ad hoc is all about, is stress testing, looking at all of the work that we're planning to do and from different angles and figuring out what can we do better. So as far as I'm concerned, process working as intended. I realize it's a little bit messy. So a few things that I will be interested in hearing more about from members of the public and certainly from staff. So many questions about, upgrading panels. And I hear you have to upgrade your panel. I hear maybe you don't have to upgrade it as much as you think you do. And I hear for certain kinds of houses, it's more complicated. So there's a lot of work to be done there around the cost and the process. And I think we're going to need to have different categories for different kinds of houses. Again, speaking for Eichler people. So that's one thing I think we need to delve a little bit more into. And then I wonder, Mr. Abendschein or someone, if you could just pop up slide 15 again, where we're talking about costs. I think we need to be super clear about lifetime cost versus initial expense. So while the lifetime costs for some of these things may be like, for electric vehicle, perfectly, it makes more sense in some respects to do that. The initial outlay is so much more significant. So I just encourage us when we're having this discussion. I know that we've got some restrictions in terms of utilities and how we're supposed to think about things over the lifetime, but we need to look at costs from both approaches. Thank you so much for popping that up. You can take it down. So that's one thing. I was interested to hear that the home efficiency genie needs more something. So let us know what that is that it needs, if that's more people or, whatever. And then we'll be talking about financing in more detail later, and certainly the short-term funding. But again, getting at the lifetime cost versus the initial outlay. And then, just looking through the second part of the AECOM action impact memo, which has all of the spreadsheet part. And for those of you following along at home, this is a 19-page document. I'm on page 7. When does staff expect this, all electric mandate for substantial remodeling projects and ADUs, which I remember we considered? Where is that on the time frame? Is that back on the green part somewhere? I should be following along with a different E.
Sure. Sorry. So you're looking at the impact analysis memo and trying to identify where the reach code is.
Yeah, because it's a big number. That's a 43, need my reading glasses, 43 million tons, right, on that single family part. And that's a big part of it.
Well, I can tell you in the AECOM impact analysis memo, a lot of the numbers cover a wide range of single family types and programs. The ADU reach code specifically, you can find in the work plan. I'm sorry to use codes here, but it's
no, go ahead.
E5. And under E5.
I see. Oh, okay, but it's only got one of the little leaves, so we should be looking at the ones that have the 3 leaves.
Yeah, and that would be more like E1. I'm sorry that this is so convoluted, but it is it's a citywide.
No, we're getting there. We're getting there. I put the work plan in the chat so people can follow along. Okay, I see. That's helpful.
Really quick, I think, and I need to double check the work plan, but I believe we're looking at the end of 2022 for that, for getting the ADU portion of the reach code sorted out.
Okay, because I'm less worried about the ADU and more worried about the substantial remodel one.
Yes, that too, though.
Okay, so that'll be a while. All right. Then just back to the panels, again, in the AECOM action impact memo in the action impact table, again, page 7 of the AECOM one. There are a lot of different references to how many electric panels need to be upgraded. And so that at some point I think would be helpful. Like if we think about however many, heat pump water heaters have already been installed, the number's less than 100 and where we need to go. You can imagine a thermometer that's going to help people understand how much needs to be done. I feel that same way about the panel upgrades. I'd like to get some more information about how many actually need to be upgraded in order to accommodate this. I loved hearing about the outreach, the idea that we're going to actually proactively reach out to people and say, hey, this is coming. Here's what we think you have. Here's what we think you might need. That's fantastic because people are busy. Okay, that was a long soliloquy. But again, I'm really grateful we're having this conversation at this level of detail and in an iterative fashion, because I think it's going to improve all the work that we need to do together. Thanks, Brad.
Thank you, Councilmember Cormack and Vice Mayor. I just wanted to add to the point of the points on upgrading panels. Thanks to Tom Cabot for posting it in the chat, a link to a web page on watt diets and steps you can take to avoid upsizing your electrical panel. So I haven't got a chance to look at that in detail yet, but that might be something that can really inform that topic.
Yeah, and so, I'll just add that I was scanning through some of the chat in Hiromi Kelty with our utilities program manager cited that it appears that maybe she has knowledge on 15 amp heat pump hot water heaters and having adequate comparable output to the 30 amp. So that goes into Allison's question on, and really an important one on what panel upgrades are going to be needed and how can we avoid those to the greatest degree possible and streamline both the permitting and associated costs. So I think that's going to be an area that we really want to understand more on how we can make this less than full panel upgrades for as many people as possible.
Great, thank you. So I think we're going to head into the public comment section of our meeting. We're scheduled to go till 11:30, so we'll try to reserve a little time for any closing comments at the end. But those of you who'd like to speak, please raise your hand. Christine or whoever was sharing the presentation. Never mind. We'll keep the timer there. That's fair. I was just going to remind people of the questions we were asking, but hopefully you'll keep those in mind. So I'll turn it over to, I think, Karen North, who will help us manage the public speaker process.
Hi, my name is Karen North. I'm the Acting Assistant Director for Environmental Services. So I have the lovely task of trying to manage speakers. So we are going to start with Sheila Tank. Sheila Chang, I'm going to allow you to talk. Sheila?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, okay. Yeah, thank you so much. This information is very informative for me. I put a lot of questions, just a simple question. I don't need to say, somebody already answered. That's great. And I'd like to know, you have a program start from 2022. And I hope I know exactly when I can work with the city. So I believe you have more meeting. We'll address that. So no more question. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Chang. And Karen, before we move on to the next speaker, I meant to also say that we'd like to promote the attendee speakers to panelists when you speak, so that you have the opportunity, if you'd like, to turn your video on while you're talking.
So our next speaker is Evan Laurie. Let me promote. And then the person after that will be John Kelly. Evan, can you unmute yourself? Evan, are you still there? Then let's move on to John Kelly.
Sorry, Karen, I'm right here. I just needed to
great.
rejoin as a panelist. Forgive me. Huge thanks to staff, to today's presenters, and to the other people joining on the call today. I have 4 quick items. I'm going to try to get through them all in under 2 minutes. The first and hopefully most important is I'm afraid that we're approaching a lot of this from still an individual action perspective rather than collective action. So let me just give a brief example. I think that the city could actually spend some time flexing our expenditure muscles. We could partner with other Bay Area government councils to align our environmental impact values and insist that common vendors across all of these municipalities submit plans for us on their climate change mitigation strategies. I see that as a huge opportunity for us to accelerate the snowball as we hopefully get more momentum here. I'd love to see the enhanced education campaign that staff mentioned, but I also think that has to include a specific kind of engagement, which is not merely soliciting public input, but engagement actually through discourse. So more questions back to the public based on the feedback that we are providing. This probably isn't the right setting for that. The event that Councilwoman Cormack held last Wednesday might be more appropriate for that kind of thing, but we need more publicity on that stuff. We've also made huge progress in the city. CPAU has carbon neutral electric generation. We've got the EV garbage truck. We've got Cool Block Beta. I think a lot of that has not been conveyed. Finally, I'd like to see a metrics update on the open data portal. There hasn't been anything updated there since 2016. And then finally, I'd like to suggest a new framework. I know it might be a little late in the game for that, and I'll follow up with staff on that. But the acronym is SPEED, which I think could be catchy.
Great, thank you, Evan. The next presenter is John Kelly. Can you unmute yourself, John? You are a panelist.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, I too would like to thank staff for its report. In particular, I'd like to commend Scott Melberg and Lisa Benatar for their work, not only in this presentation, but all their prior work as well. I'm at a high level, I'm very skeptical of some of the sort of regulatory first approaches that are being discussed here, in particular things such as the REACH goals. I think they're slow. I think they have ancillary effects, which may be undesirable for the community. And in many respects, I think they're extremely inequitable. I think that at a high level in viewing these issues and different approaches, we need to think about ones that are sort of customer centric and ones that create incentives for people to make changes quickly. I really want to join in what Evan Laurie was just saying about looking for ways to collaborate with other people. I would like to build upon that and say that I think we had a very successful example of that when the city engaged in negotiations with some of the solar providers. And I think that if AECOM hasn't done it already, it should look at the possible benefits of large-scale purchases and installation programs. Similarly, I would recommend that AECOM and the staff look at the possible benefits of training new installers and electricians and entering into long-term contracts with them, perhaps even adding them to the city staff. Speaking to Vice Mayor Burt's point about how this all scales, I don't think these programs scale with the current staffing levels that are available. I also think that in terms of the customer-centric focus and creating benefits, I don't know the details, but it sounds as though the utilities are going to benefit from reductions of purchasing offsets for gas. And I think one way to shape this in a much more customer-friendly manner would be to turn some of those into incentives and rebates for people who do electrify. Thank you.
Great, thank you, John Kelly. The next attendee to present is Gary, promoting you to panelist, Gary Lingren. Gary, can you unmute yourself? Gary, are you there? Okay. While Gary's, if you can unmute yourself, but I'll promote Brett Anderson. Okay. Gary, you there?
Okay. Yes, I'm here. It's Gary Lingren. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay. As you know, many people love their gas stoves. And so as an incentive to get people to change. Now, Lucy Stern Community Center has a gas stove. The city could put in replace that with a induction stove. And I would volunteer like a weekly workshop where people could come and see, touch, and even cook on these on the stove. So that I would be able to do that. So the city just needs to replace that stove. Any thoughts there? How would the council like to do that?
Hey, Gary, we're going in order, but I wrote that down. I'm pretty sure Councilmember Burt did as well. So we'll
Okay.
circle back at the end after everyone's had a chance.
Yeah, I'm done.
Thank you, Gary. Brett Anderson, you're next. Brad, are you there?
While we're waiting for Mr. Anderson, I would just note to all the attendees, thank you for everyone who has posted questions in the Q&A. They range from the highly technical to the broad policy areas, and staff is furiously working to answer all of your questions. So thanks in advance for your patience on that. And Brett Anderson, if you're ready, we are as well.
Yes, thank you very much to the committee for allowing these opportunities to give feedback on the plan. I have to thank the staff again for all the great work that they do. I mean, their analysis is way above and beyond what most cities are doing. I think it's at a high level. We've really got some good planning going on. My real concern here is that we're on a burning platform, and the platform is fossil fuel use. And building electrification, this meeting, I think, is really hitting the spot that we need to go to. I think this is where the community is really feeling uncomfortable about our way of life, and would be comfortable with city and utility action to help us move off of fossil fuels. So I really would urge the committee to focus in on electrification and to some extent mobility to reduce fossil fuel use in the short term. I see a lot of good elements coming together in the plan to address the barriers, but we've got to move to a proactive stance here with ordinances that will be progressively put in place to, attack the low-hanging fruit and progressively move on, letting people know that we're going to make it easy for them, financeable for them, and we're going to be removing these barriers like complexity of permitting and inspections and all of these other things that we know are holding things back. So we can't proceed with a voluntary approach because we just don't have time. Again, the IPCC is basically targeting 2030 as getting rid of fossil fuels if we want to stay below 1.5 degrees. So I think we just need to do the extraordinary work on those items that reduce short-term fossil fuel use. And then the last item would just be to follow what we set forth even in the 2016 SCAP to set targets for each of these measurable actions: water heating, space heating, residential, commercial, EVs. We know what we need to do this year. Next year, that should focus our program implementations. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Brett. Sherry Lisgarden, you're next. I've already promoted you to panelist.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you, Sherry.
Okay. Hi. So I just wanted to answer your questions. The one is, what are your top barriers? And I said it's cost, cost, and cost. This is what I hear. And I worry that, we're going to go all out on communication and outreach when the costs are not reasonable. And I don't think we should do that. I think we really need, the early adopters don't have an awareness problem, so I think we really need to focus on cost, and that's both operational cost. And I think we badly need a strong price signal for carbon, and also the upfront costs. And I think we've talked a lot about ways to mitigate that. But, promoting vendors who are charging $7K for a heat pump water heater, that's a non-starter. We cannot do that. I also really think that it's much more effective when neighbors talk with neighbors. We need these tours, like the guy was saying at the community center, put in a stove, but houses, open houses, let's go and look at a stove. Let's listen to a heat pump water heater. Let's, look at how the mini splits work. So I'd really encourage neighbor to neighbor conversations. If you'd want to do outreach, who is it coming from? Who is the most credible? Who is authentic? But I think that's really all I have to say. But I think cost is number one, number two, and number three.
Great, thank you, Sherry. Currently our last hand being raised is Hillary Glenn. Hillary, I'm going to promote you to panelist. I think we just got another Keith Bennett. Hillary? Are you there, Hillary?
I am sorry, my system just had a bit of a meltdown. Very quickly, I just am not dressed to be on a call today, so I'll just do this as a verbal comment. I wanted to thank Scott Melberg. This is the first time I've heard the city really discuss the dangers of natural gas. And I really want to applaud that. I think that the deeper I get into learning about natural gas, the more scary it gets, between the indoor pollution, the carbon monoxide risks, the backdrafting. And I think one of the reasons we got rid of our stove a few years ago was my son, who is a engineering type person, reminded me of all the indoor pollution we were getting from it. And it took a lot of the fun out. But I do think people are also attached to gas as a secondary fuel source, and that makes them very nervous about going all electric. And I know the council, or at least the ad hoc committee, has talked about how we're going to make our grid more robust. I want to really encourage you to think now about supporting some of the vehicle to home technologies that are happening around EVs. Not just, I think there's a new technology coming up that will use leaf cars. And then of course, my favorite, the F-150 electric that will come with vehicle to home already built in. Let's be a community that lets that happen sooner rather than later. Gives you another incentive to get an EV, which we all know is super important. And it makes you less worried that if the lights go out, your refrigerator has to be thrown away and you can't do anything. So thank you again. More on natural gas. Please keep talking about natural gas issues, and please start working on backup technologies such as the vehicle to home. I mean, thank you.
Great. Thank you, Hillary. Our next one is Keith Bennett, and after that will be Lawrence. Keith, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Keith Bennett, and I'm going to give a slightly different perspective on residential greenhouse gas emissions. And that is related to basement construction in high groundwater areas. The greenhouse gases emitted from the concrete used in a basement to construct a basement that needs to be waterproof like a boat and way down the house is about the same as 100 houses emissions from natural gas burning for an entire year. There are about 10 of these houses built per year. So it seems to me like that's very low hanging fruit and of no cost to the city to better regulate in terms of being consistent in messaging. On all electrification, I think we also have to remember that electrification is not a panacea. Conservation is also important. And so I think we're going a little bit down the road where if we electrify, we're therefore greenhouse gas neutral, but it's not entirely true, because some of the electricity we're paying for with offsets. Some of that offsets has been planting forests. Some of those forests in general have gone up in smoke. So just electrification is fine. I think transition to that can make a lot of sense. There's a lot of devils in the details and the costs and the timing, and conservation makes sense. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Lawrence, you want to go next?
Okay. I can't see myself. Hope I'm centered. Three things come to mind. One, I put in the questions already, is people are mentioning that gas is cheaper than electricity for a number of things. And it'd be great if the gas costs went up. And I know you can't subsidize one utility from the other, but how about internalizing the externalized costs of gas? So all the mitigation, greenhouse gas mitigation things and climate warming mitigation costs be internalized into the gas cost, which would make it go up and make electricity a more favorable choice for these various appliances. The other thing is I've talked to lots of solar contractors who either won't do business or charge thousands extra to do it in Palo Alto because of the permitting and inspection process. When I say inspection process, apparently some inspectors always have to find something that's wrong, and it can get very messy when you're a good contractor for them to do that. And then the last thing was wondering if and when Palo Alto will come up with an incentive structure and interaction capability for people who have battery storage, whether it's EVs or other kinds of batteries, to put power back on the grid to shave the peaks of demand and help Palo Alto to lower its costs And of course, that would have to be incentivized in order for people to have the wear and tear on their batteries. So thanks for considering all of these questions.
Great, thank you, Lawrence. Susan Chamberlain, you're next.
Yes, thank you. I want to talk about the raising awareness part of what you presented this morning. And I'm with the 350 Silicon Valley Palo Alto Climate Team. And thank you to Vice Mayor Burt and Council Member Cormack for presenting at our community meeting last week about electrification of residences. And we are doing our part to spread the word and raise awareness that this is coming. My question is, I don't see a lot coming from the city about this. And I looked through my utilities bill. I don't see pieces about by 2030, all residences will be electrified. Now, that might be a little too much to tell people initially, but I think there needs to be a well thought out communications plan for how to begin to build awareness through communications from utilities. I really appreciated Councilmember Cormack editorial a few weeks ago in the Weekly, maybe more opinion pieces from people from the city. But I think we have a long way to go to get even that 34 early majority awakened to what's coming. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And our final speaker is Arthur Keller. Arthur Keller. Arthur Keller, can you take yourself on mute?
Yes, I was able to be unmute now. I have two questions. First question is that when people put in gas water heaters, they get permits, presumably. Why can't you send it when these water heaters are end of life? My water heater is end of life, and I have not received a permit I have not received a notice about rebates at all. No rebates. And that means when the water heater goes belly up, I have to go to emergency, and emergency means gas, like for like, means installing with gas because that's cheaper and easier. Secondly, when you have a gas heating system for space heating, they get an incentive through lower rates. They get the zero bracket amount is larger for the first bracket amount is larger for in the winter for gas heating, for the gas use, but there's no similar incentive for using electricity. Why can't you eliminate that incentive for gas or provide a similar incentive for electricity? Thank you.
Great, thank you. So, Brad, that's all the speakers.
Okay, thank you to all the speakers. I'm going to turn it back to our committee members for their thoughts and comments.
I'd like to do that. Are we also going to have, I know we have a lot of time and staff's trying to do things in real time here. I can't keep up with the comments and answers in the chat and in the Q&A. Maybe while my colleague and I are sort of reading back what we've heard and thinking about, staff could come up with like, here are 5 things we heard or 5 answers. Especially, I think if anyone's watching on YouTube, they can't access the chat and Q&A, right? Yeah, okay, so I realize it's a lot to ask, but if there are a few things that pop out that are consistent, and also when we're done with this, I'm sure you're gonna capture the suggestions and the answers, and hopefully that can be part of an FAQ. So let me just start with that. One of the things we've been talking with staff about doing is doing a frequently asked questions in sort of natural language, not in technical language, because we are now seeing over these past couple of months consistent concerns about what needs to be done and how it needs to be done. So we're going to be working on an FAQ, and I think there's every reason to believe that we can share that out and get people to help us update it the same way I see suggestions popping up in chat and Q&A. Some things I heard today that I think are really interesting ideas. One is the idea that people will make change when it's who is a natural leader and will help them. So the idea of having the Lucy Stern stove replaced and available is a great one. So we'll figure out what that needs to be done. And it'd be interesting to know actually how many gas stoves we have throughout. Mitchell Park, for example, was that electric when we put it in, or is it gas? Do you know, Brad?
I believe it's gas.
Oh, okay. So this would be a good thing. We don't really have the ability to tell staff what to do, but they can certainly listen to us. But, getting an inventory of where in the city we have this and where we could make some of those changes. The idea of having the neighborhood leaders. Some of us have taken the tour of, Sven and Kathleen's house and had the pancakes off the induction. And A, there could be some tours, and B, also those could be videos, right? Here, this is what a heat pump sounds like. This is what the mini split looks like, right? Here's how you cook on induction. Someone could turn it off and just put your hand on it type thing. So those, I think, are very interesting ideas and places, at least that second part, where I know the community could help us. City staff doesn't have to do those videos. I'm sure, one of our enterprising students could probably have them up on TikTok before the end of the day. I liked the idea about questions back to the community, and that's more dialogue about what is preventing you. What is it? The outlay of the cost? Is it finding the contractor? Is that you're not sure? You don't want to give something up. I think that would be a good lens to use when we're going through our FAQs. I heard conflicting suggestions on whether or not we should have regulatory goals, or whether, we shouldn't. So that's something for us to think about. The vehicle to home technology for resiliency is something that I think is definitely, I'm not sure I'd seen that before in here. And it would get us past, I think, a little bit the current situation where people need to have solar on an individual property in order to provide their own resiliency. And it would allow us to take advantage of the fact that we've got people in our utilities department who spend 24/7, buying, distributing, thinking about how to get renewable energy here in the most cost-effective way. Finally, got a couple more things. Couple interesting comments on conservation, and I do think it's possible that we've a little bit lost that messaging in the big switch, with the switches on to move from gas to electric, and so I think keeping in mind that yes, you're going to have a more efficient, dryer, but it doesn't mean that you should run it, when it's not full. So just keeping in mind that isn't as a continued message is important. I do like the idea, I mentioned it earlier, about doing outreach, right? Taking the information we have and saying, hey, it looks like your water heater was installed 8 years ago. At some point in the next 2 years, this is going to happen. This might happen, and we want you to be prepared. My big overall takeaway is that I'm not sure that when the council and the city set this 80-30 goal, that it was shared broadly, or that people understood it. And so as we march along and people are talking about whether it needs to be, completely carbon neutral by 2030, or all of these other things, I think there is a real opportunity for all of us to do a better job communicating why that goal was set and how we're going to reach it. So that's one of my takeaways. And I think the community is ready for it, but we have to connect the dots for them. And I think that's where that FAQ is going to come in. So again, I'm sorry, those aren't particularly organized. They're more chronological. Vice Mayor?
Yeah, so a few things. We certainly heard a lot about the necessity to address both the costs of a home electrification and as part of that, the streamlining of the and reduction of the soft costs. So the hard costs and the soft costs. And I really think that we're going to need to think more radically than to take our current systems and attempt to refine them, improve them at the margins, and then scale them a couple orders of magnitude. I'm not optimistic that we can be successful with that approach. And I think we need to make sure that we have on the table more fundamental changes in how we would approach permitting, inspection, perhaps mass buys, certainly getting the contractor costs that are more reasonable seems to be one of the biggest barriers. So I really want to make sure that next month when we have these topics that we're having staff come forward, not just with what they are doing, but with alternatives that might be more radical from our traditional approaches. I did want to comment on this question of the regulatory approach. I didn't hear from speakers that we shouldn't do regulatory versus what we should. It was whether it was regulatory first versus really the program implementations first. And I think the answer to me is that we need to do both and do them in parallel. I also, Evan Laurie talked about partnerships with other agencies. And I think this is really important, especially with the strong role of the community choice aggregators, the CCAs that are going on surrounding us and are doing really innovative and strong programs in a lot of these areas. And as we look at how to both take rapidly emerging best practices that they may be doing and that we borrow from them, or vice versa, or leveraging resources, I think that there are a lot of opportunities that may emerge from those collaborations. And then Hillary Gland and some others spoke about the Gary Lingren on the the health and safety advantages of induction cooking. And I think that that's something that has been underappreciated in the community. When we just talk about the greenhouse gas reductions from getting rid of methane, that's a value. But I think in that particular area, and frankly other electrification aspects, the health aspects, I think will be powerful with many of our community members. And I think that's a big part of the education. And then also the convenience of induction cooking. As I thought about it, you know, we have, when we look at upgrading community facilities from at Mitchell and Lucy Stern and who knows where else, from gas to electric, if we go about that through our traditional capital improvement funding, those are public works facilities, comes out of Brad's budget. But instead, if we treat those as demonstration facilities, I can see an access to our utilities funding and to promote that electrification and best practices there. And so I'd be very interested in how we can take good ideas like that and not get bogged down in a multi-year process to implement them. We're going to have to move more quickly and agilely than we've done historically in our community. And we've got to figure out how to do that effectively and with innovation and tapping into resources that maybe we hadn't thought about before. I do think that some of the speakers, Lawrence talked about, maybe others, on energy storage of different sorts, whether they're through, I think Hillary Gland had spoke about with the vehicles as well. And storage costs are going down drastically and are projected to continue to do so. And I'd really like to see projected costs, not just current costs, really come to the front and center, because the community and others will tend to look at current costs. But if we're looking at implementing these programs over and scaling them over several years, then by the time we're out to year 5, we're looking at that cost structure. And I'd like to see that on projections on heat pump technologies as well. We've seen the last few years that those have gone down drastically. When we first looked at electrification back in 2014 and 2015, they weren't economically feasible for homes like they are today. So we've already gotten that progress, and the cost and efficiency of them continue to progress. We have some really drastic reductions in energy storage projections. And so I think we need to really have this plan and the community awareness not merely be on present costs, but future costs, because not everybody's going to implement this tomorrow. And then lastly, Arthur Keller and I think others had talked about this program that is part of our plan, which is to tee folks up to be ready to convert to, particularly in the hot water heaters, upon end of life. And so that we've got them notified on their anticipated end of life, and perhaps pre-permitted. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that next month specifically, and I just want to make sure that that is on the list to have really concrete information on how we can implement that kind of program sooner rather than later, and what resources would be necessary to do that. And I, like Allison, I haven't had a chance to read through all of the chat comments, but the few I've read, along with what the members of the public brought up, just reiterates that we've got a great resource base of activists in our community and domain experts who we intend to rely on throughout this process. And I really mean it that your engagement with concrete recommendations is really valuable, and the research that you do that complements what our staff is able to do and others is really valuable. So thanks to everybody, and keep it up. That's it for me.
Can I just dovetail on that for a minute? Brad, thanks. So we sort of talked around the permitting thing, and we'll be talking about that next time. But I just want to reiterate that we should be doing this from the outside in. We should be imagine someone sitting in their apartment or condo or home, you know, and trying to figure out how to do the right thing rather than trying to do it from the inside out. So we need some of that design thinking here on this. Because the friction, separate even from the cost, right, and the other barriers we're discussing, the permitting, the friction is high, and people are busy, right? So we've really got to lower the friction in addition to the cost, and that's really what I'm thinking about, and that goes a little bit beyond just permitting, right? So maybe we can find somebody who's done design thinking at Stanford, or somebody who's worked at IDEO or one of its many spinoffs to help us really redesign that process from the outside in. Because most people aren't going to be willing. Those people in those later categories aren't going to be willing or able to put in the amount of time to do the research on, you know, when is the 120 volt coming? When is the, you know, are there enough 15 amp ones, et cetera. So I know that staff is interested in improving that process as well, but maybe we can get some help from the community. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, and I should have added something else on. A number of the speakers have talked about, you know, who are really credible references, whether it's your neighbor, and when we go from right now of who's the first one on the block to electrify, to hopefully in a few years start looking at who are the last folks on the block to electrify, and it hit that whole social norm switch there. But part of that is not only people that we know and the credibility of our neighbors, but also of experts in certain aspects of this. So when I look to have somebody convince me that cooking on induction heating is not only doable, but in many ways superior, it's the chefs who have a lot of credibility and make me step back and say, oh my gosh, if those guys think it's great, then I got to rethink that. And I know, for instance, a number of our restaurants are starting to shift. Taste Buds Kitchen only is basically a cooking school at Midtown, and they're all induction, and they wouldn't consider otherwise. Not to mention they have a lot of training with kids, and therefore they have safety from burn prevention as well as the breathing and health there. But then the other part on all the public health aspect is that set of physicians who are focusing on the health impacts of climate change. And I really want to reach out to that community for resources as part of our advisory group, because they're the ones who are really starting to dive into this. It's a rapidly emerging field in public health, frankly, one that was lagging in many regards, and it's really picking up steam for good reason. And so I just want to make sure that we're including those experts that we can draw from, and both for their expertise and their credibility. So those are my follow-up thoughts. Thanks.
Okay, well, thanks for all the thoughts and the feedback. There was a suggestion from Councilmember Cormack about trying to respond to some of the very useful Q&A. And I think Heather Dollar on our staff team is going to make an attempt at that. I will also point out, though, we will be publishing a blog about this session and some of the feedback we received next week, and the FAQs that we've been discussing, and we'll definitely be taking all of this into account, even if it's not answered in this session. So Heather?
Sorry, Brad, were you calling me?
Yes, I was.
I'm sorry, I was trying to capture some of the Q&As while you were speaking. One more time.
Oh, we were calling on you to see if you could summarize a little of the Q&A that we'd received.
Oh, okay.
Even though I know we won't respond to it all in this meeting.
Yes, thank you. I was actually literally doing that while you were speaking. I apologize. We did get a lot of questions regarding financing, what the city can offer, what rebates we can offer. Can we as a government agency enter into a bulk purchasing program? So certainly we'll respond to that in the blog, as you mentioned. And in other forums. We also got some questions regarding permitting. Certainly that's going to be a topic for a future discussion, but perhaps we can respond to those in the forums as well. And then there were some really one-off questions regarding specific appliances that we will get to also.
Okay, thanks for that. I think that takes us to the end of our agenda, ad hoc members, unless there's something else you'd like to discuss today.
Well, Brad, maybe if you could just review for everyone, not just the general topic for next meeting, but a little more flavor for what we expect to be discussing there.
Christine, would you mind sharing the slide that has the agenda? For the agenda for the October meeting. Thanks. So there's the topics. Permitting, which we've got a lot of feedback on today, commercial building electrification, and the near-term funding and resource options. We are still fleshing out exactly what we'll be reviewing. We've got some ideas. I do think we'll want to take into account some of the feedback we've got today as we plan this meeting. Definitely, I would also add near-term funding and resource options. Really ties into that 3-year work plan that we spent a little bit of time reviewing in the presentation today. So hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, and within permitting, I assume it's implied that we've also have inspection within there. And I wonder whether we should be expanding that topic to look at the other related costs. Permitting is a major part of the barriers, but as we've been talking about, is how do we get contractors who can do this cost effectively? That's not specifically within, or probably not within, that permitting category, but I think it's a very related topic that we need to dive into and come up with solutions on. And then also we had some comments on the specific challenges in multifamily residential. So we have commercial building electrification, but I'm not sure what would be the right time, and whether it's in this meeting, to dive in a little bit more on the particular barriers of multifamily, which is 40-something% of our community, and we may have some great solutions for single-family homes and less of a set of solutions for multifamily.
Okay, yeah, thanks for those ideas. We can definitely talk about how we can try to include those in the materials for this meeting.
Just joining the conversation here, in the written materials, it's clear that there's converting, I'm not going to get the words right, but a rooftop, something on commercial buildings is, the highest immediate value. Will we continue to be using that lens like next month, or are we going to think about it a little bit more broadly? I know this sort of gets at like, what do we need to do now, and what do we need to start doing now to be ready for the future?
I think we will be talking about it more broadly than the rooftop units.
Okay. And then I just want to be sure people are following along with the near-term resources and funding. That's not necessarily that's more about how are we going to do the work, not necessarily what is the exact amount of a rebate for a certain kind of appliance that'll be available, right?
That's right.
Okay. All right. What else does staff need from us or members of the public in order to be ready for that next meeting around permitting and commercial and near-term funding?
Well, I think what's been most useful is all the comments and questions we've received from the public. There have been a couple op-eds, including yours, Councilmember Cormack. There's a lot of comments there that we've been tracking, and the comments we've got in advance of this meeting and during the meeting. Anything else we can get from the community, especially if it comes soon before we're publishing our blog next week. And if there are suggestions people have about specific things that they think we ought to cover during the discussion of commercial electrification, permitting and resources, that would be great to know as well.
Okay, I'll say that in the Q&A, there was one from someone who put themselves in anonymous and mentioned that the conversation on Nextdoor, or even frankly in the online, Palo Alto Online comments from the op-ed is significantly different from what we're hearing today. So those kinds of things need to get fed into the FAQ. I'm happy to help on that, but I think sooner rather than later, we need to get that FAQ out that is going to help people walk through this, not from a specific point, but from like, why do we have an 80-30 goal, et cetera, all the way down. So I hate to add something to the work plan, but as we see the different levels of awareness and information throughout the community, And, we have many people on the call today who are extremely aware and very well informed. I think we can't go too much farther down this road until we make sure everybody's caught up.
Yeah, I certainly agree with that. That's going to be our biggest challenge, is raising the general awareness in the community on a whole range of these related issues. I did want to bring up two other things on related to funding in our next meeting, which is, as we said, a preliminary discussion on funding. But one is what are the legal barriers and latitudes that we have on what funding sources we can use specifically in our utilities to drive these changes. And I think certainly it's an evolving field. The case law continues to evolve in recent years, but I'm hoping we'll have an update at a general sense of what current understandings are, as well as then move into whether there are specific legislative changes that would be needed to do the things that we and others believe we need to do. And I think that we could have real support from certainly State Senator Becker has been very involved in these areas, and I think we could have a lot of support for trying to rectify any barriers that may exist in that regard. And then within some of the existing funding resources, one of the speakers, I can't remember which revenue stream they were referring to, but I'm familiar with the low carbon fuel standard. And it was, I think the speaker had talked about some of the offset dollars, and whether we should quickly align revenues that we're receiving, like for the low carbon fuel standard, toward greater reductions in our greenhouse gas emissions. It seems that there's a very strong nexus there. So I'd like to be able to have a bit of a discussion next month on at least a preliminary level on those kinds of alignments that we might be able to have.
Okay.
Okay, now I know this is where it's turning into more of a colloquy, which I think is actually helpful. On the legislation, do we have somewhere on our schedule for the next year or so thinking about that or working it in? I'm trying to recall where we have that, if it's on there. It may not be, but that's something for us to think about with staff, is how to work in legislative changes that we might want to have happen. That's very small font. Make it a little bigger on my screen. Yeah, maybe that's just a lens for us to use as we go through, and something where probably members of the community can help us. They may have more knowledge about, what laws need to be changed, right, in order to make the work, in order to achieve the goals we have. So I'll just add that as a lens of things for us to think about. I know the Vice Mayor and I are, have good relationships with our local elected officials, and are more than ready to jump in and get this going in Sacramento if there's something that would really make a difference.
Yeah, I'll just dovetail on that I think that's also an area where collaboration with other agencies, the CCAs and other munis and others would be a natural fit.
Great. Okay, well, I think we'll have quite a discussion. This was a great discussion today, and definitely more to come at our next meeting in October. So I think with that, I will close us out. Thanks again to everybody for attending, and especially for your participation and all the great ideas and questions. And we'll see you next month, if not sooner.
Thanks so much, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks.